Yeah, I mean, so with that, you've been in your position now for what, 3, 4 months, and I
I'm
think that
coming
when
up on
we
my
first,
90 days.
okay, so almost 3 months, you've had a chance to kind of look at the landscape, see what's what. So what have you noticed? Yeah, in terms of what types of things do you have ahead of you that to start making your mark in the startup entrepreneurial space?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's been nice actually chatting with everybody. Like I've chatted with, I think at this point, over 70 ecosystem partners. So a bunch of different founders who've, gone through our various programs at Startup Studios, 757 Accelerate, and 757 Angels. I've chatted with a lot of other organizations who are doing work within the community. I've chatted with some council members, both at across the cities, right? And so it's been interesting because I think everyone is really excited about the opportunity that exists here. Um, but we are a small market, right? We are really, we're not the Austin, Texas of the world. We're not, um, SF or like New York, any of these like larger markets when it comes to like just like the volume of folks who actually have a startup idea, right? And I think when you think about the larger scale of like, okay, we have this startup community, right? How do we then provide, more pathways for folks to get access to funding or get the support they need? And so the biggest thing that I've actually been hearing is that, where are the founders, right? Black or white. And for me, it really has been kind of like, again, going back to education, like what's our pipeline strategy, right? Because if we're not really setting kids up for success through K to 12, then how are we going to be able to kind of prepare them for college, right? To get into, careers or like majors rather that they can actually then have the skill set that's going to prepare them to then go off and to join a startup. Because to your point, Zach, right? How do you build a skill to be collaborative or a jack of all trade, right? You do sometimes have to specialize in something and then kind of move on, right? So they can kind of start to build up your toolkit of like, here are the resources and tools that I actually have in my arsenal that I can use. I mean, I know how to solve this exact problem, but I've solved the problem similar to this. I can kind of take what I learned from this problem and then apply it to this one, right? And so for me, it has always been and always will be, education, right? And I think for us, starting at where we sit, right? We're sitting at the startup level. So like, how are we working with universities to really start to ensure that like, professors have entrepreneurial training, right? And that they're working in collaboration with us to ensure that like the students that are actually at their universities have what they need to actually start to build out a prototype, right? Start to kind of think through like what product or service they actually want to kind of focus on, what problem it is they were trying to solve, right? And then how do we then create a plan that exists around that, right? So that then they can start to move to potentially joining 757 Accelerate, where they have an MVP, right? And so starting to continue in that way. And so that's some of the work that I've been kind of looking at and thinking through, like how we can support do that. But it also requires everyone, right? And so then you think about what does that look like at a high school level, right? What are the programs we're doing to ensure that students have access and opportunity to participate in like hackathons or like working on a particular like program initiative that they actually can solve a problem. And then even going further down, like to middle school and then K to 12, like what are the skills that students need to know, obviously other than critical thinking, right? And being able to like have the math background too, right? That's going to allow them to, be successful once they kind of move throughout their education career.
It's interesting that you said, where are the founders? Right. I'm interested in a little bit more context on that. Who is saying that? Is it founders saying where are the other founders, or is it the others asking where the founders are?
I think it's just a general question of like how we can do more, like when it comes to high tech, scalable growth companies, like where are those founders, right? I think there's a lot of folks who are creating companies that might not have or be tech enabled, but they still could actually.
I mean, to me, I feel like that's environment to some extent. It's people willing to take a risk. It's people that are interested in that.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I feel like that. Like I don't know that can be changed in that kind of way immediately, because it is something that there is so many years of you're taught this is what's going to happen. This you're in high school. You're going to go to college. You're going to go work for the man. And now we're sprinkling in this other stuff. I think that's a hard task to do when you haven't seen that company that people are probably looking for in this area to look at and say, oh, I want to be that. Or even if that is happening, we're not showcasing that company the way that other areas are. I mean, I don't know. I'm 38 years old now. So that means I got on Facebook at what, 04? In 04. And that company got a ton of hype around stuff. If we had a company like that, that's now 18 years old, is that math right? Like, is there a company that we're going to see being that at 18 years from now? Are we even sprinkling a little bit of love towards that so people can start to say, hey, like, I want to do that thing. I personally believe that this area's worst amenity, worst asset is their lack of championing businesses, whether that be the smallest business or the biggest business, right? So you got companies that over the last decade have been sold for close to $1 billion or over $1 billion, and there's very, very little information about that. Not like, oh, what was the actual deal? Just like people saying like that's a big positive thing. And if we can't even get behind the companies that have done that, what makes us think that these little companies that are nowhere near that but could get to that, that we're gonna see that kind of love? Pharrell in his The Elephant in the Room performance speech, whatever you call that. I think it was Pusha T. Is that who was on stage with him?
Yeah, Pusha T.
He said when we, from a music industry standpoint, he said, we can't even release music here. We have to release in other places because we don't get the same kind of love in our own community. And so it was interesting to hear that from a music perspective, that we also kind of see that in the business side of stuff too. And so I don't know if that's something that just has to continue to be pushed down people's throat in a positive way. That's like, hey, like this is what we need. But it was interesting that some of the biggest musicians in the world couldn't even release music in their backyard, kind of like some of the biggest businesses in the world here aren't getting the love that you would expect them to.
Yeah. Agreed. I think there is that's part of the reason why I left too, right? I left, Virginia after college. It was like, well, I'm out. Bye. Like, I don't want to like go elsewhere, right? The brain drain. We talk a little bit about that at the Elephant in the Room event, which is a thing, right?
Because it's not like there aren't smart people here. I don't think anyone ever questions that, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think that because, it's twofold, right? It's like, how do we create the environment, the infrastructure, and the systems to get people to stay? But then, like, also, where is the culture that happens that keep people here, right? I think there's a lot of, things that are happening, or that could happen, like obviously something in the water, right? There's a lot of old guard leadership and like people, to your point, Tim, around like just wanting to keep it more of a small town. And so how do we, one, elect younger leadership that kind of buys into the ethos that like we can still be a small town, but at the same time we can provide additional resources and things for people to do, right? So it starts there too. But at the same time, to your point too, Zach, it's like, how do we also champion the folks who are actually doing the work here? And that's a concerted effort across multiple different industries and mediums to like, hey, this is what we want to represent as the Hampton Roads region.
But you can't get behind you can't get behind the Shamrock Marathon if you can't get behind the Something in the Water concert. They're the exact same thing. There's nothing different. So like you can't say small town and Shamrock's okay when that's a weekend-long event with a ton of people coming in, and then Something in the Water, which is a weekend-long event with tens of thousands of people coming in. They're the exact same thing on the surface. So like that to me, like I would call BS on something like that and be like, yo, you have these things like.
Culturally, right? Like how do we then start to change mindsets and shift mindsets? And I think, again, it exists across a conversation across difference, right? We're bringing people together right now. Not everyone, that you're going to bring to the table is going to be bought into the idea, right? There's some people that like you just kind of have to leave by the wayside. But like for the folks that do, right, how can we create this coalition of folks who want to move the needle and kind of move us towards progress and towards future and innovation? Because there's a lot of folks, obviously us on this call, us at 757 Collab, and throughout the community that want to see this area thrive and be the beacon of light that we know it can be, right? But like, we need to ensure that the conditions are set up so that way, there can be success, right?
If we
Yeah,
were,
with that, the other part of your position is strategic partnerships. So, like, have you started to formulate some of that strategy in terms of what partnerships that you would like created? I would venture to say, no pun intended, that the entrepreneurs and the startups and founders, they're probably more than willing to do, hey, I just want to succeed. This, what do we need to do?
Hmm.
And then it's a matter of reaching out to other folks. I mean, have you thought about your strategy moving forward to create those strategic partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, we have some. I've had a chance to really think through some of that. I think again, for us, it's really about building trust, right, and having these conversations to like start to like build authentic, real relationships, right? And that doesn't happen overnight, but it definitely like
Right.
requires consistent effort towards a common goal. Um, and so mostly it has been just mostly like kind of initial conversation, kind of thinking through like, hey, just want to know what people are up to, what they're doing, and kind of thinking the ways in which we can kind of continue the conversation. Um, and so I'm hoping that there's going to be something really big in the fall. I don't want to give too much information away, but I really want to kind of think through that more so that we can kind of like really ensure that we have the folks that need to be at the table are at the table, right? We're not, selectively leaving out people that are required that are also doing the work, right? Because to your point, Tim, earlier around like, there's a group of folks who are kind of the movers and shakers that are like really moving things along, right? How do we bring more people to that table to ensure that like, there's representation, one, but also that like there's a collective agenda that everyone can kind of buy into that's going to like lift the region as a whole, right? Not just like Chesapeake or like Norfolk or Virginia Beach, but like Hampton Roads, which seems to be, I inherited that problem, right? A little bit. There's always this like kind of crab in the barrel mentality a little bit around cities, and rightly so, right? I feel like cities have been kind of positioned in this area to feel like they need to compete with another city to get resources. But like, I think the shift in mindset needs to come from around thinking about how we look at this region as
it's a scapegoat. It's a
as
scapegoat.
it is a scapegoat. But I think like, how do we look at this as a Hampton Roads region, not just like, oh,
Right.
Virginia Beach is doing this, Norfolk is doing this, but like the
What
Hampton
city in the
Roads is
world
doing
doesn't
this.
have that? With they're sitting next to it. I mean, it to me, like, we waste so much time on that conversation. It's such a waste that cities are like, oh, I'm gonna compete against. I'm just like, you're wasting time. Like,
Yeah.
scapegoat. Like, get over it. Like, who
Yeah.
cares?
Well,
I
I mean, it's
mean,
yeah. Go ahead,
I
Travis.
was gonna say, what could it look like? I mean, I don't know what the legality of this is, but what if we turned the 7 cities into the Hampton Roads, and that'd be one major city, right? And then like each,
But to the
you
outside
know,
world, that's how it is, right? It's
right.
if it's done as a metro, it doesn't look at the little cities. It doesn't care, right? If you look at it, I don't know the exact numbers, but look at the DC metro, right? I'm sure DC proper is less than 1 million people. Yet
Hmm.
the entire metro is 7 million people or so, right? You don't look at that, and they all work together. Most of them want to work in the suburbs at this point because they don't want to drive into DC from that perspective. It works. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Who's been
ridiculous.
directly involved within the startup community for almost a decade, I want to talk to you about a serious pain point. Spending a ton of time trying to understand the business landscape in the 757. That's time that should be focused on growing the business. At StartWheel, we're here to help you by compiling all of the news you need to know about in one place. Now there's no need to search multiple websites. Just head to startwheel.org and see for yourself. That's startwheel.org.